The second commandment: You shall have no other gods before me, you shall not make unto yourself any graven image. So essentially the commandment is rejecting pantheism, it's rejecting self-divinization, it's also rejecting things like the nature deities and the pagan gods. It's saying that the God of Judaism, which ultimately also the God of Christianity, cannot have anything which precedes it. You can't have any other form of God which you're worshipping instead. And ultimately the problem that's being got at is that if you start to have human creations being worshipped as if they're God, then everything just descends into chaos. So first of all, God frees you. You cannot worship anything other than God. Heretofore, man has lived in contradiction with the material world and been alienated from his true essence, manifesting as the belief in God. Through revolutionary practice, humanity comes to know itself as having reappropriated the divine. So again, if you're coming from the dialectical materialist perspective, you're going to have to negate the old form of understanding of reality, the old commandment, and then you're going to need to have the opposite, because that's seen as, the route to the truth, the route to real knowledge. There's something that's been hidden away in there by the deceit, and you need to kind of get it out. So I mean, it's got a kind of like a life itself is conspiratorial against you kind of flavor to it. So Marx states in a very Feuerbachian sense, man makes religion, religion does not make man. And it's important to recognize, of course, that in Marx's view, atheism is a negation of God and postulates the existence of man through this negation. But socialism as socialism no longer stands in any such need of mediation. So the important thing to recognize here is that atheism only negates God. It returns everything to this kind of pre-cosmogonic chaos, and then you've got this raw material that you can then work with. So in order for man to exist, God needs to have been negated. You can't have both. And that's because once you recognize that there's a materialization of divinity, to have split divinities which are occupying the same space is too conflicting, too contradictory. We don't like contradictions in the dialectical materialist system. So you negate first, and then you take that divinity, you return it to humanity back as far as they're concerned, where it originates, and then you move forward from there. So that's why socialism as socialism no longer stands in any such need of mediation. You've got this movement where you're developing this consciousness. It proceeds from the practically and theoretically sensuous consciousness of man and of nature as the essence. Socialism is man's positive self-consciousness, no longer mediated through the annulment of religion. So the point being is that once you have atheism, you negate God. That's going to have a consequence for religion. So you're going to need to try and change the form of religion. What he negates religion with was negative humanism. But you've got all of this period where you've got this system thinking, this kind of Eurobric association between all of the governing concepts, form of logic, and so on and so forth. So what you do is you attack all of them, you provide antithesis for all of them, and then you collectively break them and then move into all of the new equivalents. So you've got this socialism as socialism no longer stands in any such need of mediation. So you're not having these antitheses being generated, which then allow you to see into the concept or the aspect of reality as it is in the future. You've done that job. And then what you've done is you've made the break with the past, you've moved into that potential future, and then that's taken as a completely new start from which then you can start to redevelop consciousness, socialism, communism in all of their new forms, but detached from all of the detritus of the past. So you now have this positive self-consciousness which has reintegrated divinity, but which is unconnected with those aspects of the past in which divinity was external to itself. So that's why you no longer mediate it through the annulment of religion. So the point is that there's a necessity to adhere to real religion. Again, subtle reference, but real religion would be the material religion of Marx's system, the pantheism which underlies it, his monad of humanity nature, also called the species being. So in his fourth thesis on Feuerbach, the essence of man is no abstraction inherent in each single individual. In its reality, it is the ensemble of social relations. So the really important thing to recognize here And this ties all into Marx's epistemology and his understanding of the world. What you have is you as an individual have a relation to the material world around you. That is contingent in part on the form of logic which you possess. So if you've got if you're schooled in formal logic or in the Christian system, you see things as distinct from yourself, then that's problematic. That's an erroneous form of relation. The erroneous relations with the material world are reflected up into your consciousness. So you've now got the erroneous relationships with the material world. The erroneous relationships are reflected in your concepts of the world, your means of reasoning, your thought. So all the relationships there are distorted. They're kind of like, it's not that they're half-truths, but they're wrong, but insofar as they're wrong, they reveal some kind of aspect in which they can be, in which the person can be guided to coming to realization of what the correct relation is. So you would have, for example, the form of logic, you're seeing things as distinct from yourself. That is a contradiction. The contradiction is merely asserted to be bad in and of itself. Therefore, you need to have the dialectical methodology and you reconnect with that external thing. And by re-establishing that connection, that Unitarian aspect, then you are overcoming that problem. So you've gone through the reflection, you've gone through the erroneous material relationship, you've negated it with the antitheses, and then you've returned to the correct material relationship. Once you have that correct material relationship with the world, that is likewise reflected up into your consciousness and then changes the way you behave, changes the institutions in society, changes the laws, changes the way that people can conduct themselves around one another, changes the religious institutions, changes the conception of divinity. So the important thing here is that once you've made that break with the old form of society, what you've then got is the social relations. The social relations are also the hierarchical ones. So you've got the individual relation between, for example, a company owner versus an employee, or the CEO in a company versus a shareholder. These are all different kinds of social relations. They are productive. Now, if you're in the old system, then you're wanting to reject those things. They're all seen as oppression, exploitation, hierarchy, cruelty, yada, 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 so on and so forth, back into typical Marxism. But here, if you're moving into the new form of reality with the new material relations, with this positive self-consciousness in which you know that you've reintegrated divinity into humanity, that you are an individual extension of collective humanity, an individual extension of the species, you now have this new, at least as far as Marx is concerned, sensuous ability to perceive yourself as one manifestation, as one arm of this whole. You are constituting this material divinity. So really what's happening in the social relations in the Marxist world is that you are doing the work of constructing divinity in the world. You are also taking part in the reformation of divinity. You are one of the, you're like a tendon in God's finger which is reforming itself or performing some sort of action. You're not necessarily completely conscious of the entirety of divinity within your own mind. You're just a kind of, you are a subset of it, but you're still partaking within that divine structure. So you're moving towards the end of history. You're overcoming all of the old society, the old forms of reason. You're constructing this in your consciousness. You're coming to full awareness of divinity, and this divinity manifests itself all across the collective. And then that collective is in union with nature, species being. So, of course, social relations and social production is the constitution of God, and then the reformation of God. That's why the material productive sphere displaces the religious sphere under Judeo-Christian systems and becomes the new domain in which moral action and worship all take place. It's the church is replaced by the steelyard. The church is replaced by the workplace. The synagogue is replaced by the school where you indoctrinate people. So it's and there's plenty of other examples you get, but you get the principle that the place where worship towards God would take place is now replaced with material construction of the world. So fundamentally, the highest place of all kinds of labour that you would take part in would actually be academia, because that's where man-made ideas of human divinity would be established. So, yeah, religious sentiment is itself a social product, completely consistent with everything we've heard so far from Marx. Of course, if you're dispensing with the idea of the Judeo-Christian system, if you're dispensing with all of its conceptions, you're going to need to get around the idea of creation. So you've got that already with the eschatology in historicism. But ultimately, when it comes to the material world, Marx then has a circular system, and that's far more consistent with what we would expect with pantheism. So you've got a generatio equivoca. The spontaneous generation is the only practical refutation of the theory of creation. So the idea is, don't have a theory of creation, you just have generation. And you can see that with that Eurobric relationship between the species and being, self-relationship, so on and so forth. So these are the works cited in this video, and likewise, hope you've enjoyed this one as well.